Thank you. I now stay in English. I mean, you just referred to Côte d'Ivoire and said you have been there, and we are paying 8 million for the elections. I mean, the main contestants are not allowed to stand. The former president, Gbagbo, is not allowed to stand. The former prime minister, Guillaume Soro, is not allowed to stand, and they removed and they don't reopen the electoral roll. And Tidjane Thiam is the leader of the country's largest opposition party. He's also not on the voters' roll, and they are not reopening it, contrary to all previous elections where they have done it. And they pretend he is not a citizen. He has been a minister in this country. And we stay taciturn, we stay silent on that. I insist. I mean, anyhow, in an election where the main contestants are not allowed to stand, we can, not finance it, and of course we could also not send an election observation mission, because we know the result in advance. So I really insist that no penny is paid, not a single cent is paid of these 8 million, unless all those who want to stand in the election are allowed to stand. I mean, who are we? We are the European Union. Yeah, and I insist that our ambassador on the ground, that she takes the floor and speaks out publicly. And it's not about our standards, it's about their own standards, that they apply their own legislation. I think that is a concrete point, and I don't know whether anybody else comes in on Tanzania. That can also be mentioned in these circumstances. I need not go into details, perhaps someone takes it up. There we have a similar situation, where the opposition leader is in jail. And our ambassador stays calm and silent. And one of our foreign ministers comes there and recently and praises the situation. I think that is not acceptable. Then we should stop all standards and all pretensions that we have any values and so on. If the African countries afford not to apply their own legislation, that is the point. Thank you.
Next on my list is Rumas Pait.
Thank you very much. Well, I guess this discussion is actually much more important than we visually see around us, so that I think that in the future we have to repeat it and in much more serious and deeper way, because I see that actually Europe's Africa policy is more or less failed. So that if you look at developments during recent years, then there is no really successful developments where we may say that European Union's positive impact is there, and we can be happy with this. It's true that the EU is is the biggest donor, as also you mentioned, for Africa. At the same time, impact of all this assistance and development cooperation is really limited. If you look at the fact that, for us here in Europe, the problem number one is Russian war in Ukraine and Russian hybrid war against Europe, and we have asked our African partners for, at least political and diplomatic support, for instance, voting in the UN General Assembly in favor of the resolutions which EU proposed, then, the support has been very, very limited. And the answer from at least some leaders in Africa is that, EU's development cooperation is for granted, and they even don't calculate on this basis that maybe they should more support European Union politically in the UN General Assembly, in what relates to the issues related to Russia and then Russian war in Ukraine. So that in this regard, actually, I don't see any substantial, results of the EU policy vis-à-vis Africa, and here I guess we need serious and deep reforms. It's also obvious that Russian and Chinese influence has very fast increased in many African countries. If you look at last coup d'etats in many African countries where before also EU was very generous development cooperation provider, and the outcome was coup d'etat with Russian presence on the ground. You mentioned also election observation missions. In Burkina Faso we had election observation mission just very short time before the coup d'etat. In Zimbabwe, we had recently EU observation mission, which was not really successful, I would say. We were basically kicked out from this country, and I never understood why we were invited at all and why we went there. There are more and more soldiers from different African countries participating in Russian army in Ukraine, combating against Ukraine and European interests directly. If you look at visa policy also in certain countries, there even South Africa still continues the policy that some European Union countries are good and some of us are bad. Some citizens of EU countries don't need visa to travel to South Africa. Some countries' citizens need to do it. So that even with such a basically small things, we see that EU's policy has had no impact at all on these issues. So that to sum up, I guess that of course we also can find some slightly positive developments, but I guess the overall picture under given geopolitical trends in the world is rather negative for us as well. And especially that well, the same huge authoritarian regimes, Russia, China, some others, are much more influential and successful than we with our huge development aid and development cooperation and well, nice words. And to sum up, I also would like to see that our delegations on the ground are much more visible and active in the countries, also telling to local societies what the European Union actually is doing in this or that country, which positive things. I guess there are also too many examples where we do, but we, well, keep silent what we are doing, and then on the ground nobody knows. They know that, well, China built all the bridges and infrastructure, although in many cases they build it with the European taxpayers' money. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I don't see any further requests to take the floor, then perhaps I can have a final question. I would like to pick up on what Michael Gahler and Ormas Paet said. First of all, Mr. Briand, Michael Gahler rightly underlined that you mentioned positive examples in Africa, like Senegal, like Ghana. But why is it so difficult to call a spade a spade? Why don't we name the countries where we have really witnessed democratic backsliding? And if we identify the countries, why don't we have an open debate? What can we actually do as European Union, and what are the consequences for this? And the second point, I'm picking upon what Ormas Paet said. Mr. Briand, I remember, must have been about 2 years ago, a conversation I had with a diplomat from an African country. And she said, Mr. McAllister, you know, my country always votes with the European Union in the United Nations General Assembly. We vote for resolutions targeting against the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine. We vote for resolutions criticizing human rights violations also in China. And we stand firm, she told me. We even stand firm if the next day the Russian or the Chinese ambassador phones and he or she might be very upset. We stand firm. But of course we start to think that our neighboring country votes in the United Nations General Assembly always against our positions as European Union. They vote in favor of Russia, they vote in favor of China, or at least they abstain, and it doesn't make a difference at all. So, I mean, African diplomats, African leaders are saying, well, I can be with the West, I can be with Europe, or I can not be with Europe, but it doesn't matter. It will have no impact at all when it comes to our financial support. And that's why I've been here now for 11 years. Why is it that in the Commission and also in the European External Action Service, why is it so difficult that the principle of more for more, which of course logically might mean less for less, why is that so difficult to implement? And we must also, I mean, we need to send out a signal to those brave countries in Africa, to those brave governments who are defending the international rules-based order, who are defending multilateral cooperation. But for us, in the end, it seems to be as if we treat everyone in the same way anyhow. But if we treat everyone equally, do we then expect equal treatment? And this is something we need to critically reflect. And this is why the Development Committee in our Parliament, the Foreign Affairs Committee in our Parliament, the Subcommittee on Human Rights, we are trying to make Africa, the situation in African countries, the development in African countries, more an issue. But in the end, that also must lead to some kind of consequences on your side. And I would like to hear from you, do you have any kind of critical reflections of this kind? Or do you believe that business as usual will be the way forward for the next years? Thank you, and I'll give the floor now to you.